though I probably 30 years ago considered myself surrendered, I think in the last few years it's been trying to really understand what that really means. And so this is why this is called Steps of Surrender. And if you don't mind, I'm going to look at these notes because I've kind of thought through it in quite a methodical way. So, it's really steps. But as was mentioned in the last, I gave a talk some time ago on self-respect, and that was interesting because some people felt that self-respect was almost opposite to surrender. You either surrender or you have your self-respect, which I think, hopefully will be addressed in this, but it's a very interesting journey, the journey of surrender. And the point that was made in the last class was something I heard many years ago, we can make spiritual efforts for many, many years, or we can surrender. And I think there's so much depth in that, not that I've realized what it all means, but we can make effort, spiritual effort for years and years, or we can surrender. And I think this is part of it, to realize that surrender is for me. First and foremost, it's for my spiritual progress, not just to help an organization. So first of all, we have to get to know ourselves, because otherwise we don't know who it is that's surrendering. And this is what I think often happens. We come to Baba and we surrender. But then as the years go by, we start to think, well, what am I doing actually? And we start to kind of question, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like as we start to enlighten, as we start to get to know ourselves, we start to think about these things in a very different way. So I think the 3 steps of surrender we could see as renunciation, sacrifice, and then surrender. And I think this is important to do it step by step. So we could say that renunciation is really letting go of the things that are not me. Attachments, addictions, things like thinking fashion is important, many things we can just start to let go of. And Baba gave a beautiful way to do this. He said, choose that which is higher. So even in this renunciation, it's more like the intellect starts to open and we start to choose what we're filling our life with. Like we start to become, I'm sure you can relate to this, we start to become very selective what we read, who we mix with, and it's just like we start to, as our intellect opens, we want to choose that which is higher. And Baba also says renunciation brings fortune. Something to think about and something to observe in your own life. Does renunciation bring fortune in your life? And I think it's a little bit connected with this idea of the shadow, or the law of the shadow, that if you chase after your shadow, can you catch it? It will always be ahead of you. But if you turn your back to the shadow, in other words, if you put the sun in front, the shadow will be behind. So if we're putting Baba in front, then things follow us. We don't need to chase after them. And I can say that's absolutely my experience. That even the things that you don't particularly want, when you're not chasing after them, they seem to come to you. Like I'm not that keen on sweets, but I remember in my younger days, we were all in our 20s, so people were pretty keen on sweets and totally at that time. But I was the one that really didn't care too much. But I always seemed to get that extra one. If there was one left on the plate, they'd give it to me. And I think, how come it comes to me? I'm not really wanting it, But do you relate to that? That when you let go of things, they follow you anyway. And when we start to let go of these things that don't belong really in the golden age, they don't belong in my beautiful self, when we start to let go of them, we start to feel lighter and lighter, because many of those things are quite physical, which belong to what we would say the gross. And as we let go and get our mind away from those things, we just start to feel lighter and lighter, because the energy of the soul is light. The energy of matter is heavy. So the more we think about physical things, we're bringing our energy down to this level. So the more we let go of these gross things, in the sense not being attached, and really just letting go, not just not being attached. A lot of things we could just be better off without. So when we start to let go of those things, we start to feel lighter and lighter. And then, of course, we are listening to the Morni and starting to be guided by Baba's Srimat. And Shri means elevated. Shri Mat, the advice that will make us elevated. So again, it's all going in this direction. But as we start to also listen to Baba and follow Srimat, as Sister Janti was saying the other day, I don't know if you were here or you've just arrived, but Sister Janti gave a class just the other day on the power of conscience. And in fact, that has helped this a lot, because I've been thinking about surrender for a while, but to me, connecting it with conscience was like the missing link. So when our conscience starts to awaken, then we start to feel aligned with ourselves, and we start to listen to that inner guide. And when we first come to Baba, of course, there's so many things that we kind of feel we should do, but it's like, don't do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. I think sometimes it can be quite overwhelming. And so what I usually advise new students especially, and remind myself also, to follow what my conscience is telling me to do. Because maybe I can't do everything today, but my self-respect grows when I follow my conscience. So at least if I can do that much, day by day, do what my conscience is telling me to do. Because there's so many people telling me what to do and how to do it, but at least start to listen to the conscience. Of course, there is some, I think, pain in renunciation, because we are dying. This is what Baba says, dying alive. Because we're dying to that old personality that we had created of ourselves. And so, when we're dying, of course, it can be a little bit painful. But again, it's a matter of choice. And there's another very nice quote. It says, be willing to surrender what you are for what you can become. Be willing to surrender what you are for what you can become. So again, the important thing, I think, so that it's not too painful, is the choice. It's having that vision of what I want for myself. Then to the second step, sacrifice. So renunciation is letting go, giving up what we don't need anymore, what's been troubling us, basically. And sacrifice is more, it comes from the word to make something sacred. So we can sacrifice, we can make sacred what is useful. And they often use this word yajna. Even in India, this word yajna is like sacrifice. And that's very interesting too, to see, what that is for us, because we're putting things into the yajna. And of course, we're also putting in the old sanskars and letting them burn and things like that. But in the yajna, we're offering what can be useful. We're offering, our talents, our abilities, our wealth, we're offering these things. But again, we need to probably purify them and own them first before we give them. Because if we haven't kind of cleaned them, then it's not comfortable, because we haven't even got it, and we don't feel comfortable with it, and we're already giving it up. So to be clear about who I am and what I am. And also when I mean also by this purifying is sometimes when we come to Baba, our life is in so much chaos that we kind of just surrender and say, okay, Baba, I'm yours. You look after everything now. And that's not a mature way to surrender. It's actually trying to get rid of all of these things that are bothering me. So we give everything to Baba, but that's not an offering. That's more like throwing the rubbish away, but not really knowing what it is and offering it to Baba. And this title, the protectors of the yajna, Brahmins are remembered as the protectors of the yajna. And so it's also taking care of these things that have been made sacred. And I think in this area too, we are, as a teacher, and I think, we're encouraging others to give whatever they can, their body, mind, wealth in this yajna. So this title of protectors of the yajna, it's also honouring and caring for those things. Because, we're also asking people to be innocent. We're asking people to trust. Who in the world trusts these days? And that's what we are being asked to do as Brahmins. It's a very risky business, isn't it? Trusting. So protectors of the yajna to me means, to really care for each other and to care for what has been given and made sacred. What people's time, people's energy, people's contributions financially, their talents. So protector of the yajna can also include all of that. And then again, going back to the conscience, that's also a developing thing. As our intellect becomes more and more divine, our conscience becomes clearer and clearer, and we start to have a greater sense of responsibility. So again, going back to this role of the protector of the yajna, we also tend to feel a greater sense of responsibility. But also what happens as we start to, make these things sacred and use things in the yajna is that when we use things in a worthwhile way, we get a lot of happiness. I would think this is the main key to happiness, to use whatever we have in a worthwhile way. So there's usually a lot of joy in this surrender, because we start to see that our talents can be used, our wealth can be used, and so there's a lot of attainment internally and happiness. But sometimes that can also get out of balance, and we just think, to just keep giving and giving, the more the better. So we sometimes don't look after ourselves. We just enjoy this happiness of giving and giving and giving, which is nothing wrong, but in the long term, we have to be quite balanced about all of this. But some of the pitfalls in sacrifice also is a feeling of guilt. When we use anything for ourselves, we feel guilty. Whether it's time or whether it's, using whatever, this feeling of guilt can come. But again, going back to our conscience, we have to see whether really we should feel guilty about using what we're using, or this is other people's voices. Because mixed in our conscience is a lot of other people's voices. That's why our conscience is not very clear. What people are telling us that we should feel and should think and should do. And so as we're, going deeper into our conscience, then we need to also differentiate between what is really my conscience and what are all these other voices that are mixed up there. And guilt is one of them. Shame is another one. When we make a mistake, when we become afraid, when we, have a sense of attachment, maybe a feeling of loss, we feel ashamed of these things. But, when we think about it, that's not very reasonable, because even Brahmababa took 33 years, right? Even Brahmababa took 33 years to become perfect. So we are going to make mistakes. We have to give ourselves permission to make mistakes and to still get attached and still get irritated and still get angry, because, we're not going to change overnight. So again, if we listen to our conscience, I think the conscience really guides us, and it is our inner guide, but I don't experience my conscience beating me up. It's a wise guide. It's the other voices, I think, when I'm feeling down on myself and losing my self-respect because of making a mistake. It's these other conditionings that have come in. And also what starts to happen as we start to get deeper and deeper in touch with our conscience is we start to have a sense of who we are, which we didn't have in the beginning. When we first, at least I can say from my experiences, when I started Raj Yoga, I had no idea who I was. And, it was just a journey of discovery. But as our conscience starts to become clearer, we start to get more clear about our role and what perhaps is meant for my destiny. And so then it goes on to another level of kind of giving, where I do have to start thinking of this balance a little bit more. And I start, feeling what am I meant to be doing? And if we are clear about that, then I experience it's very respected by the seniors. Sometimes we think, well, that sounds like I'm just, having my own ideas, but it's something that comes from deep within, and I think it's something that people can recognize. It's not based on desires, it's not based on, something limited, it's much deeper. And so when we start to know ourselves more, then we start to also kind of guide our life a little bit more, and we start to become clearer about that balance of what, to give and where to say yes and, where to go. Because we all do have a unique role, and this, Baba says, yes, it's very important that we all know that we are souls, right? So we are all souls. Everyone is a soul. But Baba says we also need to know, which soul am I? He says this sometimes in the Morni, and it's quite baffling to me to think, what does Baba mean by that? Which soul am I? So again, it's going into deeper levels, I feel, of the conscience. And when we start to have this sense of who we are, then I think we're ready for that final step of surrender. So it's not that because I know who I am, I don't say yes to anything. I know where I'm going and what I want. No, and that's what I've found along this journey, that surrender has not been what I thought it was. And I was giving the example, last time that, one time I had this little struggle because I felt that Dadi Janki didn't see me the way I saw me. I felt that I had a much higher opinion of myself than what she had. That was my feeling at the time. And so there was a little bit of a struggle. But then I went back, I was in Hong Kong at the time, and I went back to Hong Kong, and I had this experience of, in meditation during a bhakti, a 2-hour bhakti, the experience of dying, and I felt I was really dead. And so I wrote to Daddy Janki, I said, I think everything's okay now, I'm dead. Whatever you say, it's okay, I'm dead. And interestingly, Daddy Janki didn't say, oh good. No, she said, and I said, doesn't matter what I think anymore, I'll do whatever you say. And she wrote back and she said, it matters very much what you think, And so that kind of surprised me, first of all. I thought she'd be so happy that I'm dead and I don't have any opinions anymore. And then when I came to meet her the next season, I thought because now I'm dead, whatever she says, I'll say Haji, Haji, and it's going to be all so easy. And surprisingly, whatever she said, I said, I'm not sure, and I didn't agree with anything. And I thought, what is this? I thought I'm dead. But what I realized is that I died to her opinion of me. I didn't need to please her, impress her, be what she wanted to be, me to be. I died from that opinion. And so I felt so free and so comfortable with Daddy. I think for the first time, our relationship changed from then on. Because before that, I think it was very much feeling that she knows everything, I know nothing, and, I have to please her and be what she wants me to be, And I don't think that's what surrender's all about. It's a much deeper aspect than that. And since then, I think I struggled a lot, with that relationship. But since then, there's such respect and, I think, acknowledgement of Daddy as I acknowledge myself and know myself. Because Baba also says that. The more we know ourselves, the more we know others, the more we know Baba. So to have to be ready for surrender, we need this sense of the self and who we are. Then we're ready for that final step of surrender, and to move, I think, from independence to interdependence. So there's a much more flexibility, giving and taking, and I don't need to be independent because I've gained that. And when I'm independent, I don't have that dependency, so I'm not fearful. And it's a very flexible and very giving and taking relationship that's more comfortable. And then there's the feeling to surrender completely so that I can be used completely. And there's not the feeling of needing anything. And so we're free from limitations, free from fears, free from doubts. So then I think we're ready for that step of surrender. And surrender is really to surrender body consciousness, to surrender ego. It's not to give up who I am, it's to give up who I'm not. It's to give up the ego. And there's a very good story about a king. This king went to the saint and he brought a garland of pearls. And the saint said to him, I don't need that, throw it away. The king thought, what, throw it away? He threw it away, and then he thought, now what am I going to give the saint that's worthy of a saint? And he just had a flower. So he offered the flower to the king. And the king said, I don't need that, throw that away. And he thought, what do I have now? I only have myself. So he said to the king, okay, I give myself. The king said to the saint, I give myself. And the king said, I don't need that, throw that away. So really to throw away the sense of self, meaning the ego. And this, it's very tricky, isn't it? Because even in psychology, I don't know nowadays, but 20, 30 years ago, the word self pretty much meant ego. And even in Chinese, when I was first in Hong Kong, this word ziwo, it's ego and self. So it was very hard to translate this word because it's often seen as the same. But of course we know very clearly that ego is identity based on the physical, and self-respect is who I am originally and eternally. So when we're surrendering the body consciousness, surrendering the ego. And if you see the difference between, if we surrender in soul consciousness, there will be self-respect. There'll be a sense of who I am. There will be self-respect. And giving will be unconscious, because we're so full, we'll be just naturally giving from overflowing, and there'll be a happiness, and we'll be free of desires because we're so fulfilled. But if we surrender in body consciousness, there'll be fear, there'll be a whole consciousness of giving, counting how much we're giving. We'll be full of desires for recognition and some return of what we're giving. So surrender, we really need to surrender, knowing ourselves and being in soul consciousness. So we need to have this fullness before we can give. And the other thing that Jan Tiben was talking about the other day is the chit. Very interesting. The chit as like the memories. And it was so deep what she was saying, that this deep, deep subconscious that carries all kinds of rubbish, all kinds of pains and all kinds of things. So if that is clean and we surrender, you can imagine it's so comfortable and so easy, light, free, and then we're really useful. Because we're not really useful if we're surrendering our ego or surrendering in body consciousness. In fact, I think one of the biggest problems in the yajna is that we've got so many egos in here, like amongst ourselves. We've all got our egos and they're getting in the way. So if we surrender in that sense, it's not going to be something useful. And some of the things that prevent us from even this level of surrender, although hopefully if we've reached this stage, we've come to this point, but a lack of faith. And interestingly again, in bhakti, it's very much a blind faith. But Baba says, make effort to have faith. So he's really asking us to put this to the test and to see what the results are. And I think that one of the best ways to put this to the test is to really try out this thing that Baba says, you're one step of courage and I take 1,000 steps in return. And I would say that my faith has been built on that experiment. Of course, in the beginning, we kind of just, try it, maybe, or we just experience it, In fact, I didn't try it so much when I really look back, because one of the definitions for courage is that courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. Courage is when you don't even see what's on the journey, you just see the destination. I've got that kind of courage, blind courage. I just see the destination and just go there. And on the way, usually in the middle of it, I start to think, my goodness, how did I take this on? This is like, I don't have experience, I don't have what it takes to do this, but it's too late to go back. So then you start to see that, yeah, really, Baba's doing all of this. I just took this step and it's all happening. Like when I was first in Hong Kong, I was maybe 25, 26 years old, been in Gyan a few years, never organised a conference before, and there was only 2 Brahmins, myself and one other sister living in the centre, and some cooperative souls. We were so innocent. She had the idea of having this international women's conference. No, Asian women's conference. This was in Hong Kong. And so I said, oh, that sounds wonderful. Let's do it. So we wrote to all these women and men. We thought we'd have it for both. And all the people we wrote to said yes, they would come and speak, which we didn't expect because we were new, we didn't know anyone. They all said yes. And being so innocent, we said, oh, now we've got too many speakers. We better have it for 3 days. So we'd never organised, neither of us. She was younger than me and less time in Gyan. And we just had this 3-day Asian women's conference. And it was incredible. We had no planning. Where are these people going to stay? Nothing, It just... And again, in the middle of that, like after about 1.5 days, we looked at each other and said, did we organise this? And it went like a dream. No problem. We had people coming in from even London, and we had people from Indonesia, Japan, and it just happened that these people had a 5-bedroom house, and their brother-in-law, who also had a 5-bedroom house, was going away, so we had 2 5-bedroom houses with the maids and the drivers. That's how we managed. And it was just Baba, And so the experience from then, because it was so early in my Brahmin life, I think I pushed this to the maximum, this thing of just having courage and letting Baba do the rest. And it works. It really works. And sometimes it's good not to have any talents and abilities, because then you really see Baba at work. If we have the talents and abilities, sometimes he's not needed. So faith is important, but sometimes we're not sure. We're not really sure that, if we let go, God will be there. They say, let go, let God. But sometimes we're not sure. So we really need to build up this faith so that we develop that. And another kind of pitfall to this whole thing of surrender is that often we mix it with what's called in psychology codependency. We just kind of hand over everything in a sense of wanting relief, wanting someone to take our problems away, look after our life that we can't manage. And if you look at the list of symptoms of codependency, I think I could recognize that I had a lot of those in the beginning, especially coming up in these ways of what we mentioned already, fear and guilt and shame and things like that. But basically it's not having a healthy boundary, not knowing, what's healthy in emotions, physically, what's healthy in these boundaries. And so, and I think this is a very interesting thing to look up. If you just look up codependency and look at the whole list, there's about 40 points on indicators of being codependent. And in society, it's said that, I don't know what statistics they say, but something like 95% of people in this world are codependent, meaning they're not standing alone as healthy, whole people. We're depending on others, we're using others, we're not complete in ourselves, so naturally people are codependent. But this is what gets mixed up, and we don't differentiate between what is codependent and what is surrender, what is just kind of handing over all the problems, not taking responsibility, not knowing boundaries. We don't realize that. We just think this is surrender. And then what happens is we often feel abused and used. But no one can abuse and use me unless I allow them to. So I am setting myself up for this. Because if I don't have any boundaries, we had one sister in our centre, and she realised, because she was looking after the cancer, we had a group of people, living with cancer that we used to be working with, and she was looking after that particular service, and she realised that she was a prime candidate for cancer, because she could never say no, and she was just having those kind of quite codependent characteristics in a way. But the big thing was she couldn't say no. And we talked about it. There was 5 of us living in the centre, and we talked about it. It was really quite funny because we all realised that she has to learn to say no, but we all went, oh, what a pity. Because she would always do what no one else would do, right? So it was like we were a bit reluctant to give her that permission to say no in one sense, but we made it a joke of it, really. And also it was quite interesting because she had not any experience really of saying no, so her no's were very, so we were kind of teaching her how to say no in a better way, because she really had no experience of being able to say no. But it's not that you're a good person because you don't say no, is it? Often you're a weak person because you can't say no. It doesn't mean that you're a better person, and sometimes we mix that up. In fact, I had a job in Hong Kong, and the person, that I was working with, he used to always ask me to do more and more and more, and it was a part-time job, and I would say no, no, no. And he said, but I employed you because you're Om Shanti. He was Indian. He said, I employed you because you're Om Shanti. His thinking is that if I'm spiritual, if I'm peaceful, I'll say yes to everything. And I said to him, well, how do you think I stay peaceful? By saying no. Because if we don't have these limits, how can we stay peaceful? So, we have, and people have this idea that you're good if you always say yes. You're a good person, you're a peaceful person, you're a friendly person. But no, it's one of the probably main signs of being codependent is that we can't say no. And so these healthy boundaries, and the way what would be just a good way to, check and question whether something needs to be expressed, is to just ask yourself, if I don't say anything now, what will be the long-term result? If I don't start to have a boundary now with a person or with a situation, then what will be the future of this? And then you'll see that, yeah, it is necessary to have a boundary, because if I don't, I'll be, for example, suppressing, or I'll be abused, So it's not a bad thing to say no. There's a healthy sense of that as well. And we tend to have this feeling that surrender is just to say yes, yes, yes. Of course, everything needs balance. Everything. But when we know ourselves, when we're in self-respect, when we have a sense of ourselves, our no won't be a no, like I said, that sister, It will be more, well, I understand what you're asking, but, this is what I'm feeling. And often when you say that to the seniors, as I said, they appreciate that. And if they still say, well, yeah, I know, but still this is what's needed, then okay, maybe you're ready to stretch yourself or put your kind of ideas on hold. Like I was at one point, ready to leave a certain place where I was living, and I said to Daddy, I really want to leave. I've been there a long time. I went to Hong Kong for 3 months and stayed 21 years. So after 16 years I said, Daddy, can I leave? I want to leave. And she said, but who will be there? We need you there. So, my feeling was I really wanted to leave, like so strong, not for any particular reason maybe, but maybe inside there was. But Daddy asked me to stay, and I said yes, and I stayed another 5 years. And when people asked me, how long are you going to stay? I said, I'll probably die here. But it wasn't it was, I think at that time, a feeling that, okay. And Baba, again, it was like, I said to Baba, okay, I'm having the courage to continue with something that I don't feel I want to do, so you have to help me. And I sat in meditation, one morning. Amrit Vela, I had this realization, okay, if I'm going to stay, I have to be happy. I can't stay and not be happy. So I have to change my mind and be happy. And I thought, how am I going to do that? And how long is it going to take? And how will I even do that? Because my mind's kind of made up already. But then, between Amrit Vela, you go and have a shower, come back, and I sat for meditation for the next half an hour. And in that half an hour of meditation before class, Baba completely rearranged my head and made me happy. Yeah, it was really like... So then I know that that's what's meant to be, because I'm and I'm happy. I'm not like saying yes, but inside suppressing and feeling, uncomfortable. So I think it has to go together. I think if I kept feeling unhappy and uncomfortable, I think I probably would have pushed the case, but it just was a matter of, aligning with Baba, and Baba did something to make me happy to stay on there. So as you can see, nothing's quite clear cut. So we need to address that, unhealthy kind of codependency with assertiveness, learning how to communicate. And this is what we're not usually very good at. I think probably worldwide people recognize this problem in communication. We don't know how to communicate, keeping respect for the other person. And also, this is something also that happens because we can't control our emotions like anger or feeling used or abused, or all of these emotions that come up. We can't communicate because we're scared that in the middle this emotion will come up, like we'll get angry or we'll get upset. So we tend not to communicate, and we just kind of hold it in. So assertiveness is not, well, I think this and I want that, but assertiveness is being able to communicate our feelings in a respectful way. Because as Baba also says, we need to, it's a bit different context, but prove the truth with manners. Even if someone's doing something and I feel abused, then I need to learn to communicate what I'm feeling and even put a boundary there, but prove the truth with manners. I need to learn to do that with respect, with, compassion, with understanding, with all the positive qualities. And I think if most of us check ourselves, we're not always very good at that. We usually don't know how to communicate. We let this boil up until we explode, and then we get angry or we burst out in tears or something, and then we communicate. So, this assertiveness, it's not something aggressive. It's something where we're just learning from ourselves, knowing who we are, to communicate and have a two-way conversation and communication, especially with the seniors, because there's also in the past been fear of authority, and this thing of just we see a senior and we just freeze and say yes, 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 and inside we're going, but I don't want to do that. So these are all the things we're learning, because Baba's making us self-sovereigns. He's not making us servants. He's not making us followers. He's making us self-sovereigns. And so in our divine family, we can communicate with our seniors in a self-sovereign way as well. Of course, again, we're scared if we get this self-sovereignty, we'll have ego. But these are all the things that I have to work out and balance and go in that way. And just another thing that I want to mention, some years ago we were having a little meeting amongst some of the teachers, and Didi Nirmala walked past. And so we caught her because we were kind of asking, why is it that so many Brahmins don't seem to be happy? So we said to Didi, why is it that, we've found God, we're going to attain our inheritance of a golden age. I mean, we all should look so happy. Why is it that so many Brahmins are not happy? And her answer was so interesting. She said, very few Brahmins do Baba's service. And that's something we need to check. We do something that's like, we can be seen for, something we get some benefit for, something we want to do. But how many of us really do Baba's service? Really what Baba needs. And I was talking about this with a sister the other day. I think Didi's a very good example of that. And we were saying, now she's looking after Gyan Sarovar, and I can see she's quite happy here. But at least I feel, and quite settled. But we were saying that if she was asked to go to somewhere like, say Sri Lanka just for a place, and if she felt that that's what Baba wants, I know she would do it. She wouldn't say, oh, but I'm quite comfortable here, and, this has got position and status, maybe that's less. I know Didi for so many years, and that's what I think I've really appreciated in her, that she really does what Baba wants. And so this is another thing we need to check in this whole thing of surrender, because as I said, if we surrender in body consciousness, we're only surrendering and kind of bringing our egos into this and wanting to do the things that we get recognition and reward for. So I think there's a few more points, but I think it'd be good to have a little 10-minute interaction before Daddy comes. So do you have any, that's a lot of listening, do you have any comments, questions? Do you want to share something that you've realised along your journey of surrender? Can we have a microphone here, please, if someone's there? So, comments, questions? Yes, Denise.
Om Shanti. We use this word surrender, but then a lot of people say, I don't think surrender. What about dedicated? Is there a difference?
Well, I noticed you used that word the other day, so what do you see as the difference? Because the other day
you
used the word dedicated.
Facts. You have dedicated facts, it's only for the facts, We didn't never have a surrendered fax. Or you have a dedicated email for a particular purpose, So I think dedicated surrender is like there's a sword on your chest and you're yield or die. So we have this word samarpan in Hindi, which is translated into surrendered. And but it translates just as easily into dedicated, but it rhymes better with surrender.
I don't know about all of you, but when I came to Baba, the word surrender, if I held that word in my mind, it would go to a very beautiful place. So there's also something very beautiful about surrender, and I think when we've come into relationships, okay, Daddy's coming, so we...
A special request, Miraben doesn't have a voice, so I'm her understudy. Anyone who is sitting further back than the 10th row, could you please come forward? Because Daddy will have to spend half the class trying to convince you that she doesn't bite and that she can see you with her telescopic eyes, and she wants to be able to, including Sabhi... नज़दीक आवे इतना दूर नहीं बैठना है दादी को पसंद नहीं है come close. So I agree with you.
There's something about this word surrender, and even when people go into relationships, they want to surrender themselves completely. That's when they feel like this is a real full relationship. And of course, we can't do that with anyone but Baba, because no one else would really treasure us like Baba. So did you get that feeling when you heard this word surrender? Did you have this, like whenever I would bring this word in my mind, it would just go into a lovely feeling. So the word surrender, I think, is not bad. It's just our connotations and the way we interpret it. So should I continue, Miraben, or should we finish finished, Daddy's coming. Okay, so no chance for questions or interactions, sorry. Om Shanti.